Crossovers and SUVs are more popular than ever, and they're only gaining more ground on traditional saloons, hatchbacks, coupes and estates. But within people's reasoning behind switching lies a controversial point: safety. It's a common belief that due to their increased size, crossovers and SUVs keep your family safer than driving an equivalent traditional car. So today on TwinCam, let's explore that point. Before we begin, TwinCam is proudly supported by Bidding Classics, the new online classic car marketplace with an array of cool and interesting old cars. So if you fancy getting yourself a toy for summer, then please do follow the link in the description. I may be sitting in front of an Austin Metro, which is anything but a safe car, but the will behind the belief is sound. Organisations like Euro NCAP exist to increase vehicle safety, and companies like Renault made safety their big selling point in the 2000s. In fact, road deaths in Great Britain have fallen from a high of nearly 8,000 in 1966 to just 1,752 in 2019. So although the fall has plateaued since 2010, the efforts of manufacturers and regulators have vastly increased the safety of motoring. But anyone with any involvement in motoring knows the power of perception and how readily it can override simple truths, and it seems that's the case in people's feelings that crossovers and SUVs in particular are the safer choice. The thought process is to do with being a passenger during a crash, but safety is a much wider field than that, and it includes crash avoidance as well as pedestrian safety, both of which are big red marks against SUV and crossover safety. But let's start with crash avoidance, and for a number of years now, Euro NCAP has taken technology into account when grading safety. That's why some smaller and more affordable cars appear unsafe when you look at the star rating, because despite a commendable physical result, the crash avoidance electronics aren't there, so they mark it down. But avoidance electronics are fitted to both normal cars and SUVs, and actual avoidance is all down to dynamics, an area we all know SUVs don't fare well in due to their high centre of gravity. Things are a lot better today, but the point is illustrated by warnings placed on the sun visors of certain 4x4s and SUVs in the 1980s, which warned against changing lanes too quickly in case the car rolled. Fast forward 40 years, and though SUVs have gone from having genuine off-road ability to, by and large, being hatchbacks on stilts, that centre of gravity still plays a part. Let's take a look at Car Magazine's reviews of Britain's favourite hatchback and crossover sisters, the Ford Fiesta and Ford Puma. Essentially, these are the same car, just one looks like a fish that's been inflated. Car gave the Fiesta 5 stars for its handling, saying it's one of, if not the best, Super Mini on sale today for keen drivers. You can tack every positive road tester buzzword to the experience. The chassis is agile, there's loads of grip, and the steering is weighty and direct. Compare that to the Puma, which only gets 3 stars, and despite stiffer damping, it perches on its suspension. And their verdict is that it's a contradiction. Either get something bigger for its practicality, or stick with a Fiesta for its superior agility. And when studied from a safety perspective, the sad truth is you're more likely to crash a crossover or SUV in the first place. But if we go to try and prove this with data, we run into a bit of a minefield. If we take crash statistics by model and relate them to how many are on the road, we get a list of the cars most likely to be crashed in the UK. And none of the top 10 are SUVs or crossovers. Number 1 is the Vauxhall Zafira, which is an MPV, so rather taller than the rest, but the list shows no signs of what I've just said. But this does bring up a mitigating factor. This top 10 list consists of many of the UK's most popular cars, and if we dive deeper, we see value become a serious point. The top 10 is dominated by Vauxhall and Ford, but right down towards the bottom are the likes of Ferrari and Aston Martin, and even lower down is Tesla, possibly thanks to their technology. And if we take 10,000 examples on the road as a baseline for consistency, Austins and Morrises, like this little car behind me, are the least likely cars to be involved in a crash. Because only car enthusiasts now drive cars like this, and that proves that driving styles are the central factor behind these results, not the engineering. The fact that newly qualified drivers are most likely to drive Clios, Corsas, Fiestas, Polos and Yaris's, no doubt is driving these results. So next along is pedestrian safety, and this is the killer, quite literally, because we do have supporting hard data. In the United States, between 2016 and 2019, SUVs were involved in 16.9% of pedestrian and cyclist crashes, yet accounted for 40% of deaths. And that means that by driving an SUV, you're over 2.3 times as likely to kill a pedestrian if you do crash into them. And that's all to do with the greater frontal area and their weight. Now, back over here in Europe, Euro NCAP has supplied a vulnerable road users safety rating for well over a decade now. But there's something I'd like you lot to help me out with. If we take two brand new cars of different classes, a Hyundai Ioniq 6 and an Aura Funky Cat, we see that they score 66 and 74% respectively. But I'm not sure whether these are comparable scores or not. One of the biggest criticisms of NCAP is that the scores are not directly comparable between classes. And I didn't know this until late last year, and it's mental. Car classification is a huge grey area as the world doesn't fit neatly into boxes. And even if it did, not showing people a truly comparative score is the opposite of common sense. But the statement on the NCAP site describing this seems to have disappeared. I can't find mention of it, so I don't know whether that's changed since I saw it originally. But nonetheless, let's take a look at some scores. We can't compare cross-manufacturers, so we need to find manufacturers with new models that can act as equivalents. That does limit us to crossovers and to finding two models that share the same platform, but let's start with the Seat Ibiza and Seat Arona. Oh dear. These two are the same cars and were both launched in 2017, just the Arona has a bit more height and a bit more plastic, and we see that small reduction in its score from 66 to 65%. But that's a very minor one, because over at Mercedes-Benz, a C-Class gets 80%, but the GLC only scored 74%. Again, both these cars were launched in the same year, 2022. There are many worse and some better scores out there, but the years of introduction are so different that it's understandable for there to be a difference in the score. But even disregarding the possibility of different testing criteria, the SUV versions are generally less safe, and statistically much less safe when facing pedestrians and cyclists. So turning back to the centre of the argument that SUVs are safer to have a crash in, and that's not quite true either, but there's a lot more at play in this one. The first 2 points are pretty clear cut, and I don't think anyone would really dispute them. But us humans are naturally selfish, unfortunately, and when buying an SUV, it's all about us and our family, not about the person on the other end. It's just the way it is. But as I've mentioned, it's not as simple as going to NCAP and sifting through a list of scores. But bringing back the Ibiza and Arona, and while the adult occupant scores are identical, the child occupant score is 1 point up for the Arona. So the point I made about caring about ourselves matters when discussing these two sisters, because the crossover is less safe for pedestrians, but more safe for a child occupant. However, there are many vehicles on sale that aren't as easily or closely matched, and that's what we see between the Genesis G70 and GV70. Now, just to come back to our pedestrian safety point, and the saloon is substantially safer than the SUV, a 12 percentage point difference between the two. But moving over to occupant safety, and they score the same. 89% for adults and 87% for children. But diving deeper, we see that they aren't identical. In a lateral impact, the GV70 scores higher, but for frontal and rear impacts, it's safer according to NCAP's score to be in the G70 saloon. If we shift over to the Mercedes C-Class and GLC, the results are very similar. While the saloon is 1 point better for adults, children are 1 point to the good in the SUV. But as I'm saying repeatedly, the classifications mean it isn't as easy as simply sifting through NCAP scores. But without a better source for European vehicles, it's what we have. And it's still useful as long as we have the gift of critical thinking. However, it does very clearly note on NCAP's website that the real world is much more complicated than the lab, and my goodness is that true. And in the real world, the Insurance Institute for Highway Safety in the United States commissioned a report in 2011 which suggested that SUVs, on average, are safer when you compare driver deaths per vehicle, 28 per million in this case. However, pickups, which in the US are on average absolutely huge, suffer 52 driver deaths per million. And even safer than SUVs are MPVs, which do have a higher centre of gravity, but don't have the perception of safety that SUVs do, and certainly aren't as heavy, and only suffer 25 driver deaths per million. Cars, if you're keeping count, suffer 56 driver deaths per million. But what the Institute keeps repeating throughout its report is that weight is the factor that appears to give an advantage. And when the vehicles are compared based on weight, the results are much closer, though still trending towards SUVs. But if we take the date into comparison, the latest year they have data on is 2008, when SUVs and crossovers were much less prevalent on the streets, and more importantly, didn't share platforms as much. To illustrate that point, SUV sales in Europe grew from 7% of the market in 2009 to 36% in 2018. And running contrary to the Institute's findings, US government figures suggest an SUV is twice as likely to roll over, and that a person is 11% more likely to die in an SUV than in a saloon. And taking these two sources of information from the same country highlights the point I was seeing through Euro NCAP scores. That when compared like for like, the safety differences are marginal, and it's pedestrians that come off the worst. Based on all this, SUVs are not safer than normal cars. In terms of occupants, there's evidence from both sides, but as manufacturers' platforms share more and more, the advantage the SUV has seen is closing up. But what's much more clear-cut is that if you drive an SUV, you are clearly more likely to kill a pedestrian or cyclist. The biggest argument for SUV safety is owning a larger car, but by that metric, if everyone owned smaller cars, we'd all be on a much more level playing field. And with that, thank you very much for watching. If you enjoyed the video, then please do click like and subscribe to TwinCam as well. I'm forever indebted to my wonderful Patreon supporters, so if you'd like to support me that way, then please do follow the link in the description. And I'll have more videos coming along soon.